Hi, students. This is Dr. Joe Angley with a continuation of our discussion of issues in environmental science. So we're still in Chapter 2, and this presentation is on geochemical cycles. So in this presentation, we'll be learning about the Earth's geochemical cycles. This is an important topic as it underlies our understanding of many current important environmental issues such as global climate change, drought, and food and agricultural policy. So in this lecture, we will come to understand how and why elements such as carbon, nitrogen, phosphate, and sulfur cycle through ecosystems. And here, again, is our learning objectives. So substances can move quickly or slowly. You might store carbon for hours or days, and while carbon is stored in the earth for millions of years. When human activity alters flow rates or storage times in these natural cycles, overwhelming the Earth's ability to process them, these materials can become pollutants. Sulfur, nitrogen, carbon dioxide, and phosphorus are some of these more serious examples. Global scale movement of energy is discussed in detail in Chapter 9. Here we will explore some of the paths involved in cycling several important elements: water, carbon, nitrogen, sulfur, and phosphorus. The path of water through our environment is perhaps the most familiar material cycle, and it's discussed in greater detail in Chapter 10. Most of the Earth's water is stored in the oceans, but solar energy continually evaporates this water, and winds distribute water vapor around the globe. Water that condenses over land surfaces in the form of rain, snow, or fog supports all terrestrial or land-based ecosystems. Living organisms emit the moisture they have consumed through respiration and perspiration. Eventually, this moisture re-enters the atmosphere or enters lakes and streams, from which it ultimately returns to the ocean again. Here we see a graphic of the hydrologic cycle. As it moves through living things and through the atmosphere, water is responsible for metabolic processes within cells, also for maintaining the flows of key nutrients through ecosystems, and for global scale distribution of heat and energy. Water performs countless services because of its unusual properties. Water is so important that when astronomers look for signs of life on distant planets, traces of water are the key evidence they seek. Review some of the numbers in this graphic. This graphic can also be found in your textbook. Do you see a deficit of water anywhere? Do all the numbers add up? If more water evaporates from the ocean than is returned by rain, why doesn't the ocean levels fall? See what you can figure out. The carbon cycle begins with photosynthetic organisms taking up carbon dioxide. This is called carbon fixation because carbon is changed from gaseous carbon dioxide to less mobile organic molecules. Once a carbon atom is incorporated into organic compounds, its path to recycling may be very quick or extremely slow. Imagine for a moment what happens to a simple sugar molecule you swallow in a glass of fruit juice. The sugar molecule is absorbed into your bloodstream, where it is made available to your cells for cellular respiration or the production of more complex biomolecules. If it's used in respiration, you may exhale the same carbon atom as carbon dioxide in an hour or less, and a plant could take up that exhaled carbon dioxide in the same afternoon. Alternatively, your body may use that sugar molecule to make larger organic molecules that become part of your cellular structure. The carbon atoms in the sugar molecule could remain a part of your body until it decays after death. Similarly, carbon in the wood of a 1,000-year-old tree will be released only when fungi and bacteria digest the wood and release carbon dioxide as a byproduct of their respiration. Sometimes, recycling takes a very long time. Coal and oil are the compressed, chemically altered remains of plants and microorganisms that lived millions of years ago. Their carbon atoms, and hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, sulfur, etc., are not released until the coal and oil are burned. Enormous amounts of carbon also are locked up as calcium carbonate, CaCO3, used to build shells and skeletons of marine organisms from tiny protozoans to corals. The world's extensive surface limestone deposits are biologically formed calcium carbonate from ancient oceans, exposed by geological events. The carbon in limestone has been locked away for millennia, which is probably the fate of carbon currently being deposited in ocean sediments. Eventually, even the deep ocean deposits are recycled as they are drawn into deep molten layers and released through volcanic activity. Geologists estimate that every carbon atom on Earth has made about 30 such round trips over the past 4 billion years. Materials that store carbon, including geologic formations and standing forests, are known as carbon sinks. When carbon is released from these sinks, as when we burn fossil fuels and inject carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, or when we clear extensive forests, natural recycling systems may not be able to keep up. This is the root of the global warming problem discussed in Chapter 9. Alternatively, extra atmospheric carbon dioxide could support faster plant growth, speeding some of the recycling processes. As you look at this figure, can you figure out where the carbon sinks are located? I also encourage you to review the values of carbon moving into and out of the atmosphere. You may see them in this figure. Go ahead and do the math. Count all the carbon going up and all the carbon leaving the atmosphere. Is there a net loss from or net gain to the atmosphere? See if you can figure it out. Organisms cannot exist without amino acids, peptides, and proteins, all of which are organic molecules that contain nitrogen. Nitrogen is therefore an extremely important nutrient for living things. While you will not be responsible in this course for knowing the chemistry of the nitrogen cycle, you should note that plants need nitrates, as this is the form that they can absorb. But the nitrogen form that's readily available is atmospheric nitrogen in the form of nitrogen gas, or N2. So plants rely on 3 different kinds of bacteria in the soil to transform nitrogen gas into nitrates that they can use. So with all this nitrogen around and knowing that nitrogen is important in amino acids that build proteins, here is a question for you. Do you think that plants are a good source of protein? Organisms don't have to die to donate proteins to the environment, however. Plants shed their leaves, needles, flowers, fruits, and cones. Animals shed hair, feathers, skin, exoskeletons, pupal cases, and silk. Animals also produce excrement and urinary wastes that contain nitrogenous compounds. Urine is especially high in nitrogen because it contains the detoxified wastes of protein metabolism. All of these byproducts of living organisms decompose, replenishing soil fertility. In recent years, humans have profoundly altered the nitrogen cycle. By using synthetic fertilizers, cultivating nitrogen-fixing crops, and burning fossil fuels, we now convert more nitrogen to ammonia and nitrates than all natural land processes combined. This excess nitrogen input causes algal blooms and excess plant growth in water bodies called eutrophication, which we will discuss in more detail in Chapter 10. Excess nitrogen also causes serious loss of soil nutrients such as calcium and potassium, acidification of rivers and lakes, and rising atmospheric concentrations of nitrous oxide, a greenhouse gas. It also encourages the spread of weeds into areas such as prairies, where native plants are adapted to nitrogen-poor environments. Phosphorus is usually transported in water. Producer organisms take in inorganic phosphorus, incorporate it into organic molecules, and then pass it on to consumers. In this way, phosphorus cycles through ecosystems. The release of phosphorus from rocks and mineral compounds is normally very, very slow, but mining of fertilizers has greatly speeded the use and movement of phosphorus in the environment. Most phosphate ores used for detergents and inorganic fertilizers come from salt deposits from ancient, shallow seabeds. Most of the phosphorus used in agriculture winds up in the oceans again, from field runoff or through human and animal waste that is released to rivers. Over millions of years, this phosphorus would become part of mineral deposits. But on shorter timescales, many Earth scientists worry that we could use up our available sources of phosphorus, putting our agricultural systems at risk. As you have read, phosphorus is an important water pollutant because excess phosphates can stimulate explosive growth of algae and photosynthetic bacteria populations. We call these algal blooms, upsetting ecosystem stability. Minerals become available to organisms after they are released from rocks. Two mineral cycles of particular significance to organisms are phosphorus and sulfur. Why do you suppose phosphorus is a primary ingredient in fertilizers? Well, at the cellular level, energy-rich phosphorus-containing compounds are primary participants in energy transfer reactions, as discussed earlier. The amount of available phosphorus in an environment, therefore, can dramatically affect productivity. Abundant phosphorus stimulates lush plant and algal growth, making phosphorus a major contributor to water pollution. The phosphorus cycle begins when phosphorus compounds leach from rocks and minerals over long periods of time. Because phosphorus has no atmospheric form, that's to say it is not present in the air, it is usually transported in water. Producer organisms take in inorganic phosphorus, incorporate it into organic molecules, and then pass it on to consumers. Phosphorus returns to the environment by decomposition. An important aspect of the phosphorus cycle is the very long time it takes for phosphorus atoms to pass through it. Deep ocean sediments are significant phosphorus sinks of extreme longevity. Phosphate ores that now are mined to make detergents and inorganic fertilizers represent exposed ocean sediments that are millennia old. Sulfur plays a vital role in organisms, especially as a minor but essential component of proteins. Sulfur compounds are important determinants of the acidity of rainfall, surface water, and soil. The sulfur cycle is complicated by the large number of oxidation states the elements can assume, producing hydrogen sulfide, sulfur dioxide, and sulfate ion, and others. Inorganic processes are responsible for many of these transformations, but living organisms, especially bacteria, also sequester sulfur in biogenic deposits or release it into the environment. Which of the several kinds of sulfur bacteria prevails in any given situation depends on oxygen concentrations, pH level, and light level. Human activities also release large quantities of sulfur, primarily through burning fossil fuels. Total yearly anthropogenic sulfur emissions rival those of natural processes and acid rain, caused by sulfuric acid produced as a result of fossil fuel use. Is a serious problem in many areas. We'll discuss this in Chapter 9. Sulfur dioxide and sulfate aerosols cause human health problems, damage buildings and vegetation, and reduce visibility. They also absorb ultraviolet radiation and create cloud cover that cools cities and may be offsetting greenhouse effects of rising carbon dioxide concentrations. Interestingly, the biogenic sulfur emissions of oceanic phytoplankton may play a role in global climate regulation. When ocean water is warm, tiny single-cell organisms release dimethyl sulfide, DMS, which is oxidized sulfur dioxide and then sulfate in the atmosphere. Acting as cloud droplet condensation nuclei, these sulfate aerosols increase the Earth's albedo, or reflectivity, and cool the Earth. As ocean temperatures drop, because less sunlight gets through, phytoplankton activity decreases, DMS production falls, and clouds disappear. Thus, DMS, which may account for half of all biogenic sulfur emissions, could be a feedback mechanism that keeps temperature within a suitable range for all life. This figure presents the sulfur cycle. As noted earlier, this is a very complex cycle owing to the many oxidation states of sulfur. I wouldn't worry too much about this cycle, except to note that it is important in understanding environmental issues such as acid rain, lake acidification, and global climate change.